Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Performance Assurance Operating Plan drop-in session. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event. I'm joined by Katie, Anton, and V. Just before we get started, we ask that you keep your videos and your microphones off. This event will be recorded, so if you miss anything, there will be an opportunity to revert back to the recording and the slides. We will also be using Slido today, so I will share the QR code in the next slide, and there will also be opportunities for a Q&A at the end. So if you could just scan this with your phones. We will be using Slido a lot in today's drop-in session, so I will also put the link in the chat if you can't scan it. And with that, I think we'll get started. So I'll hand over. This is the agenda for today. And I'll get started.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. So yeah, today we're going to be discussing our pay ups of our operating plan for 2023-24. So the pay up sets out our particular activities for the upcoming year and identifies key areas of focus. So the kind of purpose of today's session is to run through what our initial thoughts and ideas are in terms of the activities that we're going to be focusing on as we move into the new year, but also to obtain your feedback in case there's anything that potentially that we've missed or that maybe you think would be better suited to be placed at different points in the year, and that sort of thing. So Anton will be going through giving you an overview of what our ideas are. V is here as well to provide any answers to questions or anything that you may have. We ask that we keep questions to the end, but if there is anything burning or a comment that you do need to make, just drop it into the chat or into the Slido and we'll pick it up as we go along. So yeah, Anton, I'll hand over to you. Jenny, are you okay to go to the next slide, please?
So I think the most reassuring thing when we say keep comments to the end, there's not going to be much. We're going to get to the end quickly, if that makes sense. The reason for this is we're really interested in your feedback. We've certainly not come to you with a blank sheet of paper, but here are the ideas that we have and the key areas of focus. Some of these are kind of broader changes to how we do things instead of really areas of focus. But yeah, happy for this to be a discussion when we got to the point where I've explained. So really we've got three strategic areas of focus, and the first one is particularly a bit of a change in terms of the way we do things. So we think fundamentally parties have signed up to be a member of the REC. They know the obligations and they know that they've made a commitment to meeting them. We do understand there are times where strange things happen and that there needs to be a bit of common sense around that, but people understand their obligations and they have made that legal commitment. So I think it's important for us to help drive accountability and facilitate that those who kind of consistently meet their obligations have less interaction, and those that have some challenges are probably more areas that we're engaging directly with. This probably will feel like fewer RFIs. I think that's probably part of what it will feel like. It might feel like greater consultation where there's definitely something going on, but it doesn't look like that thing is about a single party or there's an individual challenge. So how do we do this? Because it can't just be that we disappear. That's not the right solution. A lot of this is about driving accountability for performance, and a big focus of the PAB has been that we share information on performance. And I'm sure you guys will know that we'll be sharing annual ratings soon with individual organisations, and at the end of the year, subject to some safeguards, we'll be sharing some of that information in public. So there's a real incentive for organisations to meet their compliance obligations and to deliver customer outcomes in a real way. Now, you'll notice in there that we're not just talking about parties in the way you might suggest, you might expect, as suppliers, distributors, MEMS, those kind of things. It's also service providers. Accountability for service providers' performance is a real big focus for our next 12 months. And I think that's really important. I think it's also important that we let people into our world a bit more and tell them what's going on, what we see. Obviously, in assurance processes, there is some natural confidentiality, but actually sometimes we see things that are about the entire market and we can explain, and particularly about where things are going well. And the past 12 months have had their challenges. Let's not lie about that. But there have been things that worked surprisingly well, and I think letting people into the world on that a bit more is important. So that key thing, driving accountability for performance, less RFIs and exploration in that way, but probably more sharing information, making more of that information, and showing a bit what we're doing, particularly around service providers. The second one's focused on a risk I think we could all anticipate. We anticipate over the next 12 months there could well be a resumption of mass market switching, and we do need to watch carefully how that goes. It might be that as volumes increase massively, which might happen, that some parts of the entire ecosystem, there might be some strain. It might be that our role there is to help provide guidance on doing things quicker or resolve through actions with service providers. I guess we're not here to solely hold suppliers and DNOs and GTs and etc. to account, but also to find those problems and unblock them. So we're in a really good place with the information that we have to monitor mass market switching, and that's going to be a really important thing that we're watching continuously. The third one is readiness for MHHS. Some of that we need to change the way we do things. So, for example, there's an entry process change for new entrants, some qualification bits that we're doing with the programme and with the BSC. Clearly, there are some new risks. Things will change as people migrate and the transition occurs, and we need to reflect that. I think that's a super important thing. As you would expect, our key goal is kind of not getting information from individual parties, but ideally getting it from central systems, and we're going to try and use this as best as we can to further improve that. But clearly that comes with changes. If there are any changes, if we don't need a piece of data anymore, that is a change that we need to bring organisations on the road with, particularly changes to the park, etc. So those are our key areas of focus. We have some specific activities, so if you please move on to the next slide, and some breakdown of where we would focus. A key thing for me leading this team is to try and make sure we balance things right. There's a lot of things to look at. There's a lot of different areas assurance is required. This is our focused approach. So 10% of our time will be focused maintaining qualification. 20% we expect on market entry, although let's be honest, that is partly to do with how many people apply. We spend a quarter of our time focusing on the performance of service providers, includes assurance of the accuracy of their reporting, but also understanding and developing action plans to drive improvements. In previous years, we had direct assessments of parties. You might see this in other codes where there are market audit type activities. We're not looking to do that this year. We think that can be particularly onerous for the individual organisations. Like, I'm not saying it's never in it, like there are times when that's an appropriate thing to do, but we don't think, given the nature of the market, the particular burdens on many of the parties, that that's the right thing for us to do. And then party monitoring. I think it's really important that we're looking at the real market, the real data, understanding what's going on and responding to that, as I've said, particularly should there be a resumption of mass market switching. If we could just move on. When you see the document, there is a timeline which we drive our team to deliver. A lot of it is stuff that you'd expect. So the very top line is market entry assessments happening every month. There's no month that we have a break from that. That's really important, isn't it, for get entrants through appropriately, challenged but appropriately fast. But there's a couple of things I wanted to call out on these slides. The first one was that annual rating of party performance. We've trailed it several times, but we're expecting to be sharing that shortly. And there is a webinar later in September to talk about that, also to talk about the broader things we're seeing in the industry. One of the things that we wanted to call out is a direct assessment of data access to CSS. So this doesn't really involve your typical party, but I think it's really important that the confidentiality of these services is maintained by the right people having access. So, you know, if you're a fully signed up operating supplier and we see you've got access, that's great. The question is, you know, all the kind of edge cases, are they appropriately got the right access to the right information to protect that data and protect that service? We've done similarly beneficial activities for the 2 inquiry services in the past, and we think this would be a really positive step. The other thing that we're looking at is an analysis of MEM data reconciliation from CDSP. This is an attempt from us to get better coverage of MEM data without too many asks for information. Clearly, I'm sure you'll all understand there's a balance, isn't there, between ease, costs and coverage. But this is us exploring a better way of getting quality outputs on MEMS performance using techniques that don't need much engagement from those involved. If we move on to the next slide, there are other things in here, but I don't think they're the most significant. I wanted to call out some things on our plan in relation to the PAB and the activities they'll be performing. We've scheduled quite a lot of activities. Clearly, if things change, we can add more things to them. The PAB often ask us for specific information, but there are 2 topic deep dives that will be happening in the run up to Christmas, one on switching and another one on either dormant parties or parties who are looking like they're experiencing exponential growth, so that we can understand if they've got appropriate controls to maintain their compliance in both of those situations. There's quite a lot of activities relating to MHHS, so the industry via the PAB will be able to input, challenge and refine the things that we are doing in that space, and also it'll allow us to deliver bits kind of into the programme. Those who are engaged in that programme will know about our timelines, for example, for some of these particular documents, and allow us to kind of drive forward to a point where we're all fully ready for MHHS. The other sets of deep dives, the kind of bottom 2 boxes, are the PAB getting greater input and oversight into driving the performance of different service providers. Now, the bottom ones are the service providers under the REC. So the services provided by DCC, where we're proposing the most frequent updates and challenges for that, given the importance of that service and the historic performance over the past year. The inquiry services are there too. They're also really, really important. And the services that RECO as a party provide, which are quite broad, they do include the code manager, the metering auditor. There's quite a large range of things that RECO provide under the code, all of which are valuable services to the parties that pay for this. And I guess we need them to be performing well and delivering value for money. The code manager has a kind of a special place in the REC arrangements. So we're doing 5 deep dives onto the performance. These are operational updates the code manager will be giving and getting challenged from the PAB. And you can see that there's assurance in there, change management, a really important function, including the codes roadmap, which is kind of a lens on that. stakeholder engagement, and delivery of technical services. So I guess I was here to give you a good idea of the ideas that we had. I guess probably the later part of the conversation is to get challenge and thoughts and input. I wonder if we could skip on to the next slide. The first thing we wanted to ask you is well, we've asked some questions, and at the end, if we haven't got the right questions, please do let us know. But the first question is there anything that we're missing fundamentally? Things that you were expecting us to focus on that aren't on our list that we should consider, we might have missed? Really interested in that kind of input. Oh, on the previous slide, why was the park review off to the side and not on the calendar? I don't have access to the slides, but I have the master document open. So the park review, I think, was scheduled. Oh, okay, I see. I can explain that because I wrote that slide and I now understand. The document's a little large, partly because the operating plan is really useful for us to drive our team, so we know what we're supposed to be delivering when, allocate resource. The Gantt chart was actually a bit bigger than was quite easy to show you, and I didn't want to talk to you for too long. There is, for every of the performance assurance framework products, there is a scheduled date, and I thought it just became quite visually confusing. But we're definitely reviewing the park. I can talk about that a little bit, although I might be overdoing it, so do challenge me if that's what I'm doing, but I can just find the date. It looks like the park is looked to be reviewed and subject to submission to the PAB in October 2023, so pretty soon. I don't know. I don't mind a bit of dialogue, but if the person who raised that question wanted a little bit more information on what that would involve and the intent, I'm happy to do that, and you can please come off mute, but I won't overdo it because I might be, there's a chance I'm over explaining in that area.
Hi, it's Helen from Siemens. That was my question. Yeah, I think you've just answered it. I'm sort of going to closely watch the outcome of that review, so I just wanted to make sure that it was there and it was happening. Yeah, of course, and yeah, that park review is a category 2 change process. Industry needs to be involved, frankly. So we'd get a consultation on it. I believe it's category 2. Yeah, it goes through the change. Like, it's more like a proper change, if that makes sense. I know that's not the perfect language, but it feels more like a change with a consultation. Lorna, how will poor performance be investigated if RFIs stop? So RFIs are not going to stop. That's not what I meant, and I apologise if I wasn't clear. We think, and you can challenge me if you think I'm wrong, that maybe the balance of techniques is not being quite right. RFIs are still in play, as are all the other techniques. We're not proposing to change or remove them. What I think we're going to do differently, because I think the rig in particular has been a success, is take one category of issue that we had been using for RFIs and using the rig instead. So sometimes we've seen a cross-cutting performance challenge, and what we've done is issued to several organisations who have suffered that challenge an RFI and said, what's going on? I'll give you a really good example of this. This was true of switch meter reads. A lot of people performed at I must say, a poor level with switch meter reads. The RFIs and the information gathering suggested that actually a lot of people didn't understand what they were doing. So we issued guidance
Now, there are other instances where performance is much more problematic than this, where RFIs are definitely still appropriate. I do think at the end of the year, we'd probably see more consultation than last year and still RFIs, but the balance would be different. Lorna.
I was actually going to use what you've just used as my example. Because I think what I was trying to say was, I think it's down to interpretation, because as I see it, switching reads are governed outside of the REC. The process that is within the REC is the ability to resolve an issue.
Yeah.
And a high number of that doesn't mean that there's a REC issue. It means that suppliers are acting promptly to fix an issue.
I don't think that was what was happening. What we were seeing was it was taking a really long time to get people through that process.
Well, that was the bit I was saying, because we got a pre-warning. We didn't get an RFI, we got a pre-warning. And it suggested, the way that it was worded suggested that you've got a high number, that's wrong. Whereas I would have expected to say, why did it take you 3 months to answer the majority of your queries, or it took you 3 weeks, or whatever that was, and target it to say, right, you've had X number, this percentage was done outside of SLA, and target it rather than just because like I said, the email we got was just like, you've got a high number, and I'm like, but a high number is a good thing, because it means that we're resolving known customer issues and raising them quickly. And it means that potentially there should be something you should be handing off to either BSC or UNC to get the cause reading process looked at, depending on the fuel.
So what I would say to that is this hits on probably the hardest thing that I think in the REC, right? The REC involves a lot of, I need to find the right word here, but processes to fix a bit of a problem for a customer. So if I give you an example, the existence of these processes is not inherently a problem. Annulments, withdrawals, erroneous switches, switch meter reads. It is important that these things get resolved quickly. That's the REC obligation. But there's also a thing where sometimes these are caused by something else, and an increase in them can mean there's a problem elsewhere that is a real problem. So what's the best way to say this? We have acted in an area which we definitely would continue to act on organisations with 100% objection rates, and we have intervened and improved their performance. But your organisation has objections.
Every supplier has objections.
Those objections from the outside, if they're a similar rate to the rest of the industry, probably look all right. If there was a big spike in them, we might be interested as to why, because that might indicate a broader problem. And if you're at 100%, that's not right, is it?
Yeah, but I think
not right. So dealing with these issues, I think it's important that we still look at where there are increases in these kind of, I don't know quite the word, error handling processes, and we need to communicate with your organisation's rights. So we still might be interested in people where things have gone up. In the case on switch meter reads, it was definitely about timelines. And to be honest, I think the code is super hard to understand. So we're trying to write it in much simpler forms in essentially a PowerPoint and change the code so it's less impenetrable. And I think that delayed people resolving switch meter reads.
It's developed that way over time. Because I mean, I've been dealing with them that long that I can remember when it was written. But it developed that way over time. I think, right, go back to what you're saying. I think what you said there about objections, that's a key one for RIG for me. Because, for example, when you wrote to us you've got a spike, and we went, it's contract renewal time, it's April, of course we've got a spike. So it's using RIG to help increase your knowledge and understanding that, yes, there are cycles within the industry, that if you are not used to dealing with suppliers in a non-domestic market, for example, RIG can help you with that, rather than spending time targeting individual suppliers to go, what have you done?
So I think this is a good example where we need to differentiate, where we need to engage with RIG. That definitely should happen more, and it has been happening more. You'll see on the CSSP one, the way we engaged, I believe, has been much better. And in other areas, I still think there's a place for RFIs in other areas, and it's trying to tell which one. I'm not saying RFIs banned. I'm saying we need
no.
to be proportionate sometimes and not use them and
Yeah,
ask, and in other times we do need to use them.
I think what I'm trying to get at, I'm not saying I disagree with you. What I'm trying to say though is, I feel like there's not enough. Maybe it's just because we're good. I don't know. Maybe we're good, and maybe we've just not had any. But I kind of expected to see more on the. You've had 200 agreed reads, and you only answered to 50 within the SLA. What are you doing? And I don't think you're there yet. I think, and ETs is exactly the same. ETs, it's been you've got a high number of ETs. It hasn't felt like because we've had serious issues with suppliers answering ETs, and we've had to resolve them through our OEM, and we'd have expected PAB more to be hand-holding that than us doing it through the OEM route. And it's just to flag that, yeah, I think that's kind of where a lot of us would like to see the help, because you will help us because you're helping us getting things fixed quicker for the customer. And it's more don't look at the big numbers, go and look at where these processes are needed. Are they happening quickly and efficiently?
Yeah, and this is about an extent to which question,
Yeah.
I take your steer, right? Still, if someone spiked to 100% objections, you'd still expect me to talk to them.
Yeah.
And if objections across the industry trended up, you'd still expect me to go to RIG.
Yes.
But I do think compliance with the SLA is really important. On erroneous switches, that has definitely been our focus. But I think we'll take that steer very clearly. And I think actually it's been a really clear steer. We'll probably tell PAB about it. I think there are supplier representatives on PAB who would very much agree. There's been a big push from them that erroneous switch resolution is the key thing.
It's the resolution, not the not. Yeah, I get that there's an issue in the number. That's almost longer term. It's when it happens, make sure it happens promptly and the customer has it resolved quickly. Yeah,
okay. Well, I think I take that steer. I think we'll definitely have a think about it. We'll definitely talk to the PAB about it. Yeah. And we'll see how we can respond.
One final thing, and I know I've been talking for ages. Agreed reads. I think a key for me is making sure everybody understands the difference between a missing read and a disputed read.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I've been trying for years to try and get the missing process to actually work the way it's intended, especially electricity. Gas, it's not that big an issue. But in electricity, trying to get the missing read working for what it was intended, because I don't think it is. And also the disputes, make sure they're resolved quickly as well, but making sure that there's clear differentiation. Because the missing read is almost, what do I want to say? It's almost a handover to BSC to say D86 process is broken.
Yeah.
And there should be like a cross-code working there, whereas disputes is a different thing. But it's making sure everybody understands which is which.
I think that's really helpful in our work on switch meter reads. A lot of it has been, how can we expect with this so hard to understand when we read the code for such a consistent thing? There definitely are areas where we need to, be a bit more assertive, but where the code is not clear or well written, part of our role is identifying that and working with our change teams to address it. But the distinction between a missing and a disputed read is an important one. I take that point.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Happy to move on to the next question. If I ever drive this too fast, the reason we're here to talk to you really. So, but could we? So this is one that I think has been a real reflection of mine recently. It's easy in my position to think, right, we'll do this. These organisations will do that, and then we'll get to the end. And sometimes the impact on other organisations cannot always be thought. We might underestimate that. Maybe there's a good way of saying it. So are any of these activities more onerous than we might think? It's exciting when someone's typing, eh? Just whilst we're waiting, I'd like to say thank you for coming and helping steer it. That really is appreciated. It really is appreciated, and will be better if we, what's the way of saying it, like do this together and steer it into the right place. Yeah, okay. Okay, I think, Lorna, we've kind of talked on that RFI one about getting the right balance. And I see what you're saying, and I hear that.
Yeah,
and that's one of the reasons we're trying to, like, there's always a case for an RFI, but trying to get the right balance and use them at the right time.
Yeah, I think like an industry RFI is one thing, because they're just normal industry processes, kind of part of the change process. A targeted RFI is a totally different thing, and that makes people very twitchy. And I know I've fed back to that to you before. That's not going to change. And it's just to make sure that you do understand it. And I totally agree on that meme comment. We submitted it as well. It took forever, and it was a very large request that took a lot of resources away and didn't really. It was difficult to understand exactly what was going to happen with it.
So can I talk about that to cover this a little bit? There are quite a few processes that metering equipment managers do that we think are important that aren't covered by the metering audits currently. So the kind of things we're talking about here are MTDs, a lot of the information that gets exchanged when there's an installation or exchange, also fault resolution. Our original approach to this, as you'll all know, this is our default approach, was to try and get it out of industry data, central data, DTN, RGM, AIX. I must admit that wasn't a success. Some organisations just didn't appear at all because they used bilateral, they had bilateral agreements not to, and to exchange it in a different way. Other organisations, frankly, looked awful in the performance because some of their processes, might involve a request and then not a request. And when we spoke to them, we knew that they weren't actually as awful as they looked. So it became quite misleading. Now, we do need to look at and have confidence that these are working. We don't want to get to the point where we go to the metering providers and do market audits. That's kind of one of the things that we're trying to avoid, because they're really heavy-handed and onerous, and they're quite expensive. And we want to find a better way, right? That's essentially the whole goal of performance assurance under the REC. The MEMS RFI is an exploratory one-off where we're trying to work out, if we get this systematically from parties, is this going to work better? Some of the parties provided us what I would regard as decent quality data. The consistency of information that we got across the board has been challenging. And, some organisations gave us quality data, others didn't. We did spend 3 months engaging with organisations about, if we asked it this way, would that make it easier? What about that way? People had a lot of opportunity to comment, but that in itself is expensive and onerous for you guys to input in. So this has been a really challenging thing for us to do in a modern way that is light touch and doesn't cause too much issues. We need to communicate shortly about the outcomes of the MEMS RFI, but it has taken a lot more work than we thought to get useful information out of it. So I guess this is the challenge here. Now, I don't think, given the importance of this area, the answer is no assurance, but I do think it needs further thought based on the outputs of these RFIs. Helen, I think you've got your hands up, or hand.
Yes, so sorry, I don't know how to change my anonymous to my name on Slido. That second comment was mine. So we got involved in that early feedback on what that RFI was going to look like, and I know you said that was expensive, but that was definitely worth doing, because the initial request that you had would have been impossible, and we made it possible for the actual submission. We also ended up going back to your service desk several times whilst actually trying to pull the data together with more questions about
Yeah.
is this what you want or not. I don't think you guys ever came back to us afterwards. Did you end up going back to other MEMS? Is that just because you didn't come back to us because you were satisfied with what we'd managed to submit in the end? Because we did have big problems pulling it together. One of my big bits of feedback though was, well, there was two things. One, a lot of the inconsistency was probably because D1s to D2s are not a one-to-one relationship, and I ended up saying this a lot at the time, that your open faults to your closed faults is not one-to-one. Yeah. So that made it very hard, especially going back 6 months. Like, what was how many faults did you have open on a certain date was a very difficult question. Yeah. That leads me on to my second point. It would have been a hell of a lot easier to have taken a data snapshot on the dates that you wanted, so like at the month end dates. So if you want that sort of information going forwards, it would be really good to know in advance, because then we'll take a data snapshot on the days that you want.
Yeah, and I think V's come on camera because she'll have some specific answers, but I just wanted to acknowledge we went through that process, engaging and asking to try and make it easier for you. I was actually not worried about the expense on our side. I was worried about the effort on yours. But I do think in future, if we have clearly some problems are quite easy to solve, but this is not a simple thing. We do need to invest time. And when you asked questions, it wasn't just you, there were a small number of pretty engaged MEMS that was really useful, because we can it's much more efficient that way. But I've written down some of the feedback you've given, like the much easier to take a month-end snapshot. V, I think you came in to cover one of the points.
Yeah, I was just going to cover Helen's point around feedback on the MEM-RFI. So we had set a deadline in July. However, many parties requested extensions. So we only got responses from many other parties by the end of last month. So we are currently doing our analysis on that data, and we are reporting insights to PAB on this. We will take some decisions to PAB around, should we be doing this going forward or not? But we'll come and address that and share that feedback with MEMS, either on an individual basis to those who responded or to the community as a whole, but we'll definitely do that. So that is on the list. Please don't worry about that.
Thank you. I didn't have visibility of that. I didn't know we hit the deadline, so I didn't know there were extensions, and that's caused a delay.
Yeah, I do think there is a challenge sitting in our seats between pragmatism and understanding impacts on individuals and being consistent. So let's just be really honest. If someone has a problem with an information request, we do talk to them and are pragmatic. If someone said, look, the key person's been off sick for 4 weeks, we probably would discuss them and be pragmatic. It probably isn't great, Helen, for you hearing that we were pragmatic to others.
To be honest, though, the only reason we hit the deadline was because we'd actually known from like Easter that this was coming, because we were one of the parties involved in that pre-session. So to be honest with you, we'd actually blocked out time for this and started thinking about this before the RFI even hit, before the request was actually made. So I can see how if other MEMS hadn't done that advanced prep, how I know you gave 6 weeks, but it was a lot to do in 6 weeks. So I can see how other organisations struggled if they hadn't planned it from Easter, planned it in advance like we did.
Yeah, and there wasn't a special bonus list of people to invite there. We invited everybody. Maybe some people are more engaged in these things than others. And we do try and signal our intent. Like you saw a 2-week turnaround on a CSSP1 thing that had a month's lead in and opportunities for people to say, oh, that's not the right question, or frankly, don't ask us in August, which we listened to. So I think some of that signaling is important. So you can do what you did, Helen, which is saying, well, I know this is coming, I'm going to plan ahead, because you can't plan ahead to an RFI if it comes now and it needs to be done in 2 weeks. Yeah, right. Are the timings of the activity proposed appropriate and achievable? And we can send these around, right? This is kind of back to some of the discussions we had just now with Helen. Sometimes there are things that are happening in your businesses pushed by other regulatory codes or obligations that just make sometimes super busy. And like, we definitely know about many of those because we talk to people. But if there's any particular thing that you're like, oh, don't do this in October, whatever it is, it's helpful to know, right? It's helpful to know. No typing. Of course, we can send these slides out after, and the door's always open. The door's always open. So if someone thinks of something later, that is, of course, appropriate.
That's a really good point, Anton. The slides will be available after the event, and also we will have a survey linked on the REC Wiki page to this event, so you can fill these in after if you prefer.
So if we move to, I think question 4 is the last question. I think it's a anything else question. So yeah, I think this is a time for any other thoughts. Feel free to type them, or I'm quite happy to have a chat to someone if they raise their hands as well. So I think the most important final point is this isn't the only time you can ever speak to us. It's not a process like that. So if you do have any thoughts, if you have any concerns, there is some flexibility in our plan to respond to how the market responds. We need to do that with you and provide consultation opportunities at the right point, but do be in touch with our team if there's something specific that we can do differently, or general in fact. Helen.
Just a bit of a general question. What do you do with the park data that you get? Because again, I submit a lot of data, and I never get any feedback from that.
Yeah, so the primary feedback mechanism is the dashboards, which shows you what we see. The reason for that is that you can interpret it and use it to manage your performance, but also you can see it as we see it, so that our reactions to it are kind of understood. Now, there is quite a lot of data, and some of it comes directly from central sources. So providing it to you is our primary form of mechanism of feedback. There are a couple of other mechanisms, though. If we see something in your data that is of interest, then we probably would speak to you. Depending on what it is, that might then get into performance assurance techniques. So if we discuss that organisation who had 100% objections, that went into the performance techniques. This is a weird one, but it's like when you drive around and the speed cameras are on, getting no letter from the speed camera is in a way a positive sign, but we recognise that that's a little bit, I don't know what the word is. It's not very active feedback, is it?
No news is good news. Yeah.
No news is good news in some ways. We are told by PAB if you go over a threshold that we must do something, and the gentlest thing we can do is say, hey, you've gone over the threshold, which is an appropriate thing to do, particularly if we already know why, for example. There is an annual rating that takes some of these things together. That covers, for the moment, suppliers and DNOs. There aren't particularly a great deal that GTs provide to us, and there are for MEMS, but we want to make sure that we want to make sure that we give we have a full decent picture that we trust before we're talking about it in that kind of nature. But those are parts of the feedback. One of the things that I am thinking about, though, is it's not just yourself you care about, it's also the market. So we do need to think about how we tell you about what's going on in the market. Actually, lots of things have been working. We haven't communicated those, and we will be communicating those as part of our annual report. Things like perhaps you end up as a person like me because of a kind of a focus on fixing things and challenges. There are challenges in the market. It is not perfect, but there are things that are working. There have been particular challenges around DCC service provision. That's definitely true, but fundamentally, we think that the switching market and that those services has in some ways proved that it's operating properly, and that some of the areas in annulments, withdrawals and objections, for example, are mostly doing their job. I wouldn't say they're perfect, but I think they are kind of working, which is really important. So I do think some like more regular feedback on that is an important thing that I think our team need to do. I assume Lorna's next. I don't know if I want to just say, Helen, did that? I might not have answered your question, frankly. I wanted to check.
Yeah, no, that was good. Thank you.
Lorna.
Yeah. I'm kind of following on from that. So there are quite a few within the industry who aren't providing data where it's the requirement is on them for various reasons, mostly data protection.
Sure.
Is there a plan to open that up again and have that a sensible conversation that says, right, we don't want to give you MPANs for everything, but if we give you numbers at an aggregate level, would that help? Because at the moment, I am very conscious that you're only getting a part picture for some of it. And we never got to the bottom that said, look, can we have a conversation on this that says no MPANs unless you need them, but or MPRNs.
Yeah,
but
makes sense. Yeah.
We recognise it for quite a few of the metrics where it is rec relevant, and some of them weren't. But where it is rec relevant, we recognise that you probably need the data.
Should I tell you what our plan is on that? And it does need a steer from the PAB, right? The PAB is kind of the industry brain and consumer focused brain that helps guide us. Before we say that, I should just recognise that what you've said was feedback that we received on Reco on the Road.
Mm-hmm.
You might have been the person that
probably was me that said it. Yes.
I don't know, and it might have happened. Somebody else might have said something similar. There's a couple of things here. Sometimes the data that we've been asking for is to enrich, so we understand. Often, like a really classic example of this, we feel differently about objections in the non-domestic sector to the domestic sector. They have different rules, and trying to distinguish between the two, like they need to be treated separately. So one of the things that has not been consistently provided is the breakdowns of domestic to non-domestic, and some people as a result have had more RFIs. Now that doesn't really work, does it? That doesn't really work. I think if in 10 years time we were still doing this and we're in that kind of weird situation, that doesn't really work. But I think the one of the things that we need to do as a result of this is boil down what exactly is needed.
Exactly.
And have some consequences for those who do not provide those. I think there is some uncertainty right now, and I think that uncertainty needs to be removed.
Yeah.
That clearly is not Anton having a chat to some random people in the team and Reco. That needs to be done properly through the PAB and the industry governance. But you're right. I think it needs to be fair. One thing we always think about is those people that provide us data never should be penalised for that. We're thinking about this in building the TPI code of conduct.
Yeah, they made their business decisions, and those of us who haven't made our business decisions. But at the moment, I have an open business risk because I'm not providing you data. And every month for the last 2 years, I've had to update it saying I've had no feedback.
So on the MPXN thing, I can give you a specific answer on that. But I think I've given you the macro answer where it kind of needs to be bottomed out, doesn't it?
Yeah, because if I give you a quick example, right? One of the requirements was gains. You wanted every MPXN by sales channel. That's not reasonable. I think at an aggregate level, we could give you the numbers and tell you these are face-to-face, these came from a broker, these are SME. That, I think, is a reasonable request. But at no point did you offer to have that conversation.
I think we need to offer to have that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean,
the one thing I will say is your conversation is going to get easier because it won't be me. But
Lorna, it doesn't matter about whether it's easy or not. We have to do it properly. Like I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think those of us who aren't provided it have been left in limbo, and we know that technically we are, to the letter of the law, in breach of the REC just now.
Yeah.
But we're in breach without having had a conversation.
So there needs to be a conversation.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a single line for
Yes.
the parties. Like clearly, a supplier is different to a MEM, is different to it. Like, but depending on who you are and what you do, that should drive what your data provision is. The MPXN thing is held up because we paused it because we were engaging with the ICO.
Yeah, and we never got feedback on how that went.
Well, I can tell you, neither did we. We're still still waiting for the ICO, but that is clearly a what's the way of saying it? That's clearly a dependency that we've been waiting on, but perhaps we've been waiting too long.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean you can't have the numbers.
Well, like maybe, like I think we need to get to a point where we give a baseline and we agree it.
Yep.
And like, this isn't the nicest conversation, but I think there needs to be enforcement, but there needs to be buy-in to that baseline for enforcement
but
to
also,
be possible.
I mean, I've been having these conversations at Energy UK as well, and I do give regular updates, but I think there needs to be a sensible conversation, because I'm not the only supplier that's not giving you everything. I know that. And I know that some of them are as big or bigger than I am that aren't giving you the data. So there needs to be, you can't go straight to enforcement. There needs to be a conversation that says, yes, if we have, I don't know, if there's a certain sales channel you think that doesn't look right, absolutely you have the right to ask for those MPANs, and we will give you the MPANs. But I don't think you've got the right to say, give me all your sales.
So I think there's something in this. I think there definitely is something saying about how do we have a chat about it. I don't think it's for me to decide how that process happens, but I think it is for the PAB. If the PAB, like, we clearly will put some options to the PAB and some recommendations on how we think this needs to go. But if they say, right, that's the right route, then we will execute that route. I agree, enforcement is not the first thing we go to. That's right. But enforcement has to be part, like, it has to be part of it. And I think the quid pro quo is that we have to get agreement and buy-in that the ask that we have made is appropriate, as well as explanations about why we got there. So the fact that the ICO have not provided us any input, they acknowledged our request, right? Actually, the request was made by Reco and they acknowledged it. So it's not like it's not got to them. But I believe this is I'm not quite sure the right age, but this is a couple of years old now, 2 years old.
Easily,
maybe it's 2.5. I don't think it's quite 3.
I don't think we're at 3, no, but we're definitely more than 2.
We probably need to do something. I think waiting's wrong. We need to communicate that. So park review in October, that might not be that has to include some of this, doesn't it? It has to include some of this discussion. What's the way of saying this? This is the most sensitive bit that we've talked about to me, maybe. So maybe I need to speak to some of those who are quite engaged in this process as we develop that thinking. Not everybody wants to talk to me all the time, do they? Let's be honest about it. But if you're a person who you think would be interested in, discussions, sense checks, those kinds of things, please do either get in contact with me separately. I think you should all know how to do that, or tell me now, or anything like that. Like, I'm open to that.
Yeah, I think the one thing I will say is if you're wanting for the supplier community, at least, if you're wanting a sizable conversation, I would recommend going through Energy UK, because, like I say, they've been fully engaged in this.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good idea. In another realm, we're going to Energy UK about this in relation. Well, I think Reco are going to Energy UK about the CSSP1, and I will be reaching out to ICOS. So we do think that's a relevant way of doing things. Personally, I don't think I'd go straight to Energy UK. I'd probably talk to some people who know about some of the sensitivities first. But like, I do take the point that might be a way of getting closer to an end.
Yep. Okay.
Any more?
I think this is just for any more questions for the Q&A portion. But, yeah, other than that, I think that's everything for today. We haven't got any Q&A questions, so.
Well, the last thing that we must do is a big thank you, right? We do this for a reason, because it's really beneficial to us. It is time out of your day. I really do say thank you, and I think it's really important to do this the right way, and you should see that we're I would hope that you can see that we're working hard to improve this engagement and give you an appropriate voice. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. And just before you go, we do have a survey that you can fill out just to let us know how we did and things we can improve on. And yeah, thank you all for attending.